Sasha Obama stepped into the airport, filled with confidence and anticipation for a meaningful journey. But within moments, she was thrust into a humiliating chain of events that drew every gaze toward her. What could have possibly turned an ordinary trip into a public nightmare? This story will leave you stunned, outraged, and unable to look away. Stay tuned to uncover the shocking truth, and don't forget to share this eye-opening tale to spread its impact. The sun had just risen over Washington, casting the morning sky in hues of soft orange and pink. Sasha Obama, 22 years old and resolute in her desire to establish her own identity beyond her family's celebrated legacy, adjusted the straps of her backpack and glanced at her phone. It was just past 6:45 a.m., and she was en route to the airport to catch a flight to New York City. She had been invited to present her research at a prestigious youth conference, an invaluable opportunity to share her voice and ideas with other promising minds. Her emotions were a mix of excitement and apprehension. Rehearsed lines and potential questions from the audience played repeatedly in her head. The night before, her father had offered words of encouragement. "Remember, you're there because of your dedication. No one can take that away from you." She appreciated his support, but shaking off the weight of the Obama name was never easy. Stepping into the bustling terminal at National Harbor Airport, she was immediately hit by the noise and chaos of the early morning rush. Announcements echoed over the loudspeakers, mingling with the chatter of travelers and the rhythmic clatter of suitcase wheels. On tiled floors, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted from nearby kiosks, mixing with the faint scent of jet fuel lingering in the air. Sasha navigated through the crowd with ease, her slender frame allowing her to slip through clusters of travelers. She approached the check-in counter, gripping her ticket and ID tightly. Behind the desk was a woman wearing a name tag that read Diane Morgan, who barely looked up as Sasha placed her documents on the counter. "Good morning," Sasha said politely but succinctly. The woman glanced up, her eyes narrowing slightly as they shifted between Sasha's face and her documents. "Flying to New York?" Morgan asked, her tone neutral but tinged with faint irritation. "Yes," Sasha replied. "Business class." One of Morgan's eyebrows arched as she held up the ticket, inspecting it as though it might be counterfeit. The pause stretched uncomfortably, the air between them growing tense. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Morgan's voice carried a subtle but unmistakable note of skepticism. Sasha blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem?" Morgan's lips tightened as she continued scrutinizing the ticket before turning her attention to her computer screen. "We don't usually see passengers like—" Her voice trailed off mid-sentence, her expression tightening as if she realized she had said too much. "Never mind. Just making sure." A flicker of irritation crossed Sasha's face, but she brushed it aside. She wasn't about to let a rude employee ruin her morning. However, when Morgan called over another agent, whispering something while gesturing toward her, Sasha's irritation began to simmer into anger. The second employee, a man with a stern expression, approached and scrutinized her documents with excessive care. "This ticket is for business class," he said, his tone laced with suspicion. "I know," Sasha replied, her voice steady but firm. "It's my ticket." The man exchanged a glance with Morgan, then reluctantly nodded. "Fine, go ahead," he muttered, waving her through with a dismissive flick of his hand. Sasha grabbed her ticket and ID, her jaw clenched as she moved toward the security checkpoint. She could feel curious eyes on her, though no one spoke. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the next step. The security line was long but orderly. TSA agents barked instructions as passengers shuffled forward in small increments. Sasha placed her backpack on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector without incident. But as she reached for her bag on the other side, a TSA agent blocked her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," the agent said. "We need to conduct a secondary screening." Sasha frowned, glancing at her backpack, still untouched on the conveyor belt. "Is there a problem?" "It's just a random check," the agent replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. He gestured toward a cordoned-off area separated by retractable barriers. "This way, please." Sasha complied, though her frustration was building. The so-called random check included an invasive pat-down, a thorough rummaging through her bag, and repeated questions about her travel plans. "Who bought this ticket for you?" the agent asked, holding up her boarding pass. "I did," Sasha responded curtly. "I'm traveling for a conference." The agent smirked. "Pretty fancy conference if you're flying business class." Sasha's face flushed with indignation, but she bit her tongue. She knew escalating the situation would only make things worse. When the agents finally returned her belongings with a perfunctory, "You're good to go," Sasha walked back to the main terminal. Outwardly composed, she couldn't hide the turmoil inside. Glancing at the clock, she realized she had less than an hour before her flight. Quickening her pace, she resolved not to let the morning's events distract her further. But as she neared the gate, Sasha spotted a group of airline staff huddled together, their eyes darting in her direction. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a frosty demeanor, broke away from the group and approached her. "Miss, I need to see your ticket and ID again," the woman said, her tone devoid of courtesy. Sasha handed over her documents, her patience wearing thin. The woman scrutinized them before speaking. "We've received a report that there might be an issue with your ticket. Please come with me." "What kind of issue?" Sasha demanded, her voice rising with frustration. "It's just a routine check," the woman replied, already turning and walking toward a side corridor. A sense of unease flared in Sasha's chest, but she followed, her heartbeat quickening as she realized the hallway led away from the gate area. The woman stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow you to board this flight," she said, her voice cold and definitive. "You'll need to leave the airport." Sasha stared at her, stunned. "Why?" The woman shrugged, her expression devoid of emotion. "We have our reasons." Fury ignited within Sasha. "This is unacceptable. I've done nothing wrong." The woman crossed her arms. "If you don't leave willingly, we'll have security escort you out." Sasha clenched her fists, her mind racing. The humiliation felt suffocating, tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them see her break. Pulling out her phone, she called the one person she knew could help. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I need you." The calm, steady voice on the other end replied, "I'll be there." But for Sasha Obama, those words weren't enough to quell the storm brewing inside her. Standing in the dimly lit corridor of the security area at National Harbor Airport, Sasha replayed the events of the morning in her mind. The humiliation of being treated as though she didn't belong seeped into every corner of her thoughts. With less than 45 minutes until her flight's departure, she was stranded here, alone in the eerie silence of the hallway, marked only by a door labeled "Authorized Personnel Only." She gripped her bag tightly, her hands trembling as adrenaline coursed through her. Instinct urged her to step back into the bustling terminal, where at least there would be witnesses. But hesitation held her in place, fear of what might happen if she moved. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a text from her father. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay where you are." Sasha exhaled shakily, the reassurance bringing her a sliver of calm, though the anger still simmered. Why had she been treated this way? She revisited the morning in her mind. The faces of the TSA agents, the airline staff, the whispers, and the pointing fingers. The pattern wasn't hard to see. Growing up in the Obama family, Sasha was no stranger to the subtle ways prejudice could manifest in people and Oppo's actions. But this time it was different. This was blatant discrimination. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. 2 TSA agents appeared, their postures rigid and their expressions stern. The man held a clipboard, gripping it as if it were a shield, while the woman carried a handheld scanner. "Ma'am, we need to conduct another screening," the man said in a monotone voice, devoid of empathy. "Please place your bag on the table." Sasha clenched her jaw. "I've already been screened twice," she replied, her tone calm but firm. Her parents had taught her that maintaining composure was often the most powerful way to resist injustice. The woman's expression remained impassive. "This is a random check, ma'am. Compliance is mandatory." Sasha stared at them for a moment before, reluctantly placing her bag on the table. Her eyes followed their every movement as they unzipped her backpack and began rummaging through its contents with little regard for organization. They pulled out her laptop, flipping it open as though searching for hidden compartments. Her toiletries bag was overturned, its contents spilling across the table in a chaotic mess. "Is this really necessary?" Sasha asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. The male agent ignored her question, instead holding up a book she had packed. "What's this?" he asked, his tone accusatory, as though she were hiding something incriminating. "It's a book for the conference I'm attending," Sasha replied, her patience fraying. He squinted at the cover as if it were written in an alien language, then tossed it aside carelessly. Meanwhile, the woman ran the scanner over her laptop with deliberate slowness, her movements exuding a sense of control that felt almost intentional. Sasha glanced around, hoping to catch the eye of someone who might intervene, but the corridor remained eerily empty, amplifying the suffocating sense of isolation. After several invasive minutes, the agent stepped back. "We need to hold on to your bag for further analysis," the man announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No, you can't," Sasha protested, stepping forward instinctively. "You can't just take my belongings. I have a flight to catch." The woman's gaze hardened. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to escalate this matter." "Escalate," Sasha repeated, her voice breaking with indignation. "You've already humiliated me in front of everyone at security, and now you're trying to take my things. This is harassment." Her words echoed in the empty corridor. The agents exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, before the man stepped forward once more. "You need to calm down," the man said, his tone dripping with condescension. "We're just doing our job." Sasha inhaled deeply, trying to steady her racing heartbeat. She knew she couldn't let her emotions take control. "Not here, not now. I'm not going anywhere without my bag," she said, her voice quieter but no less resolute. The man opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a new figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It was the manager who had confronted her earlier, flanked by 2 security guards. Their arrival only made the already stifling atmosphere even more oppressive. "What's going on here?" the manager demanded, her sharp voice cutting through the tension. The female TSA agent straightened. "We're conducting an additional screening. She's refusing to cooperate." "That's not true," Sasha interjected, her voice cracking with frustration. "I've complied with everything you've asked, and now they want to take my bag for no reason." The manager's eyes narrowed as she looked Sasha over from head to toe. "This is becoming a disruption," she said curtly. "You need to leave the airport." The words hit Sasha like a slap. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't done anything wrong." The manager's expression didn't waver. "We have the right to deny service to anyone who poses a security risk." "A security risk?" Sasha repeated, incredulous. "You're calling me a security risk because you don't like how I look." Silence hung heavy in the air, oppressive and suffocating. The security guards stepped forward, their stances menacing. Sasha felt her chest tighten, her breaths becoming shallow and rapid. This couldn't be happening. "I'm calling my father," she said, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. The manager pressed her lips into a thin line but said nothing as Sasha raised the phone to her ear. The call connected immediately. "Dad," she said, her voice quivering. "They're kicking me out of the airport." Her father's voice was calm but firm. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." When the call ended, Sasha turned back to face those standing before her. "My father is on his way," she said, her tone carrying a weight of authority that belied her youth. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next." The manager hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. But before she could respond, the male agent muttered loud enough for Sasha to hear. "Daddy's coming to save the day, huh?" Sasha's jaw tightened, but she refused to take the bait. Instead, she stepped back, leaning against the wall, waiting. She felt the weight of scrutinizing gazes from those around her, their silent judgment thickening the air. But Sasha refused to let them see her falter. In the distance, the noise of the terminal persisted. Announcements blared, passengers hurried to their gates, and the world continued as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. For Sasha, time seemed to crawl, each second stretching into eternity. Then, at last, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. A measured, steady rhythm, calm yet purposeful. She lifted her head, a wave of relief washing over her as she recognized her father. Barack Obama strode toward her, his presence commanding, his face a mask of determination. His footsteps reverberated through the narrow hallway like distant thunder. His presence immediately drew the attention of everyone nearby. Security personnel straightened reflexively, their detached expressions shifting to wary focus. The manager, standing at the forefront of the group confronting Sasha, froze momentarily before attempting to compose herself, a nervous smile flickering across her lips. Sasha stepped away from the wall, her relief evident. She had always admired her father's ability to remain composed under pressure, and at this moment, his calm authority felt like a shield against the storm of humiliation and anger that had battered her since she entered the airport. "Ms. Obama, are you all right?" he asked, his voice measured, as though the tension in the air were invisible to him. Sasha nodded, though her throat tightened as she tried to respond. They're trying to kick me out of the airport." Barack's gaze shifted to the manager, his expression unreadable but heavy with expectation. "Is that true?" he asked, his tone polite yet firm. The manager hesitated, glancing at the TSA agents as if seeking their support. "Sir," she began, her voice tinged with defensive irritation. "We had concerns about her behavior. She became disruptive, and we have protocols in place for situations like this." "Disruptive?" Barack repeated, raising an eyebrow. His calm demeanor didn't waver, but there was a sharpness in his tone. "Could you explain exactly what my daughter did to be labeled as disruptive?" The manager opened her mouth to respond, but the male TSA agent interjected, his voice brimming with misplaced confidence. "She refused to comply with our security procedures. We were just doing our job." "That's not true," Sasha snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "I complied with everything you asked. You treated me like a criminal for no reason, and when I pushed back against the harassment, you called it disruption." The male agent's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The manager, meanwhile, seemed to shrink under the weight of Sasha's words. Barack's gaze swept over the group, his face hardening. "It seems there's been a serious misunderstanding," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. "Let's address this properly. First, my daughter will not be leaving this airport unless she decides to. Second, I want a detailed explanation as to why she was singled out for additional screening in the first place." The manager cleared her throat, attempting to regain a semblance of control. "Sir, as I mentioned, we have protocols. Her ticket was flagged, and we followed procedure." "Flagged for what?" Barack asked, his tone now edged with impatience. "She has a valid ticket, valid ID, and was prepared to board." "What exactly prompted your additional scrutiny?" The woman faltered, her face reddening. However, the male TSA agent crossed his arms and replied, "Sometimes we have to make judgment calls, especially when something doesn't feel right." "Something didn't feel right?" Barack repeated, his voice dropping a tone lower, weighted with quiet authority. Each word seemed to press down on the air in the hallway. "You made a judgment call based on how my daughter looks, didn't you?" The tension in the corridor became suffocating. The female TSA agent shot her colleague a nervous glance, but he avoided her eyes. "I assure you, the manager began, her voice unsteady. "We do not tolerate discrimination at this airport. That's an admirable policy," Barack said, his tone icy. "But actions speak louder than policies. From where I stand, this situation reeks of bias. My daughter is standing here, humiliated and distressed, because your team decided she didn't belong in business class. Am I wrong?" No one answered. The silence was heavy, as though guilt itself filled the air. Barack exhaled slowly, the sound laden with disappointment. He turned to Sasha, his expression softening. "Are you ready to go?" he asked gently.
Sasha nodded, gripping her bag tightly.
She was ready to leave this nightmare behind her, though a part of her bristled at the idea of letting these people off the hook. As they turned to leave, the manager stammered, "Sir, perhaps we can discuss this further." Barack stopped, his back still to the group. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, but the warning in his tone was unmistakable. "You'll be hearing from me, and I suggest you prepare for a thorough review of these so-called protocols." Without another word, he continued walking. He placed a reassuring hand on Sasha's shoulder, gently guiding her back toward the main terminal. The corridor behind them remained eerily quiet, as though the weight of what had just transpired lingered in the air. As they walked, Sasha felt a mix of relief and lingering anger. She glanced at her father, searching his face for some hint of his true emotions, but his expression remained calm, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "I'm sorry you had to come down here. I didn't know what else to do." Barack stopped and turned to her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Sasha, you don't have to apologize for standing up for yourself. What happened here today was unacceptable, and it wasn't your fault. You did the right thing by calling me." His words soothed some of the tension coiled in her chest, though the sting of the morning's events still lingered. "They treated me like I didn't belong," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I know," Barack replied, his tone heavy with both anger and sadness. "And they're going to answer for that." As the father and daughter stepped back into the main terminal, the noise of the airport began to fill the silence between them, the announcements blaring over, the speakers' hurried footsteps, and the low hum of conversation felt jarringly loud compared to the stifling quiet of the corridor they had just left. Sasha glanced at her father. His composed demeanor stood in stark contrast to the emotional storm swirling within her. But she knew him well enough to notice the sharpness in his stride, the quiet fury he rarely allowed to surface. Every humiliating moment of the morning replayed in her mind. The invasive questions, the demeaning searches, and the pointed looks that suggested she didn't belong. It was exhausting, yet her father's presence felt like an anchor, grounding her amidst the chaos. They stopped near a row of chairs in the terminal, far enough from the security checkpoint to avoid prying eyes but close enough for Barack to remain watchful. Sasha sat down, gripping her bag tightly as though it were a lifeline. Her father remained standing, his gaze scanning the area with an air of calm authority. "Dad," she said softly, her voice tinged with pain, "I don't want this to happen to anyone else." Her words hung in the air. Barack nodded firmly. "It won't," he said, his voice resolute. "I'll make sure of that." Just then, an airline representative in uniform approached them. Her expression was a mix of unease and professional composure. Two other staff members followed closely behind, their posture stiff and uneasy. The lead representative, a woman whose name tag read Susan Miller, addressed Barack directly. "Mr. Obama," she began, her tone carefully measured, "on behalf of the airport and the airline, I want to apologize for the inconvenience you and your daughter experienced this morning." Barack turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Inconvenience?" he repeated, his voice calm yet carrying an edge that made Sanders shift uncomfortably. "You're calling this an inconvenience?" Sanders hesitated, her confidence faltering. "I assure you, sir, we take matters like this very seriously. I've been briefed on the situation, and I want you to know that we are investigating." "Investigating?" Barack echoed, his tone clipped. "Let me be clear, Ms. Sanders. My daughter was humiliated, treated as though she didn't belong. This isn't an inconvenience, it's discrimination. And if your staff can't tell the difference between the two, then you have a much bigger problem than you realize. Sasha remained silent, watching the exchange. Her emotions were a mix of vindication at her father's words and the lingering frustration from the morning's events. Sanders' face flushed as she glanced at her colleagues, seemingly seeking support. "We deeply regret what happened," she said, her voice quieter now. "If there's anything we can do to make this right—" "There is," Barack interjected, his tone calm yet carrying the undeniable weight of authority. "First, I want the names of every TSA agent and staff member involved in this incident. Second, I expect a full report on the so-called procedures that led to this. And third, I want you to ensure that this kind of behavior is not only addressed but eradicated entirely." Sanders nodded quickly, pulling a notebook from her pocket and hastily jotting notes. "Of course, Mr. Obama. I will personally oversee the investigation." "You won't just oversee it," Barack said, his tone turning cold. "You will act. Because if I don't see immediate and concrete changes, I'll make sure this incident is brought to the attention of every major news outlet in the country." The threat, delivered in an even tone, caused visible discomfort among the group. Sanders scribbled furiously, nodding repeatedly as she and her colleagues retreated. Turning back to Sasha, Barack placed a hand on her shoulder, the touch light yet reassuring. "We're not finished here," he said quietly, his voice steady but resolute. "But first, let's get you on that flight." The airline's decision to delay the flight for Barack and Sasha stirred murmurs among the waiting passengers. Whispers spread quickly, and several people craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the former president. Sasha, feeling the weight of their stares, kept her head down as she followed her father to the gate. The gate agent, a young man with a nervous smile, hurriedly scanned their boarding passes and gestured them forward with exaggerated politeness. "Have a great flight, Mr. Obama," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Barack offered a curt nod, his focus unwavering. As they walked down the jet bridge, Sasha exhaled deeply, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time that morning, she felt a glimmer of relief. Once seated, Barack turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked. Sasha nodded, though her voice carried the unease that still lingered. "I'm just tired." Barack placed his hand over hers, his gaze steady and sincere. "I know, but you did the right thing, Sasha. Standing up for yourself, calling me. That took courage." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly to keep the tears from falling. "I shouldn't have had to." "You're right," Barack agreed, his voice tinged with sadness. "But until people stop making assumptions based on appearances, we have to keep pushing back." The flight itself passed uneventfully, but Sasha couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled over her. She stared out the window, the clouds stretching endlessly along the horizon, while the events of the morning replayed in her mind. She thought of the TSA agents, the manager, and the smirking guard, people who likely never considered the impact of their actions. Her father's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "What's on your mind?" Sasha turned to him, her gaze steady. "How to make sure this never happens again." Barack offered a faint smile, pride flickering in his eyes. "Good, because this fight isn't just about you or me. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong." His words settled deep within her, igniting a renewed sense of purpose. By the time the plane landed in New York, Sasha was more determined than ever to turn this experience into something meaningful. As they exited the plane, Barack's phone buzzed with a new message. He read it quickly, a flicker of heaviness crossing his face. "What is it, Dad?" Sasha asked. He handed her the screen. It was an email from Sanders, outlining the immediate steps the airline and TSA planned to take. But what caught Sasha's attention was the final line. "We have placed the involved TSA employees on administrative leave pending further investigation." It was a start. The email lingered between them as they walked through the terminal at LaGuardia Airport. The suspension of the TSA employees felt like a small victory, but it wasn't enough to lift the weight of what had happened. Barack clenched his jaw as he slipped his phone back into his pocket, his mind already working through the next steps. For Sasha, the morning's events remained an open wound. The humiliation, the scrutinizing looks, the cold indifference. All of it lingered like thorns embedded in her thoughts. As they stepped outside, the noise of New York City offered no solace. The chaos of the city mirrored the turmoil still churning within her. "Dad?" Sasha began hesitantly as they slid into the back seat of their waiting car. "Do you think anything will really change? I mean, they suspended those employees. But isn't that just damage control?" Barack turned to her, his gaze firm. "You're right to be skeptical," he said. "Suspensions are just the beginning, but they're not enough. Accountability has to go deeper. The systems that allow this kind of behavior need to be dismantled." Sasha nodded, though her frustration still simmered beneath the surface. "I just don't want this to be swept under the rug." "It won't be," Barack assured her. "I'll make sure of that." As the car weaved through the crowded streets, Barack made a call to his team. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable sense of urgency. He recounted the events at National Harbor Airport with precision, emphasizing the need for a comprehensive response. By the time they arrived at their destination, he had already mapped out a plan. The story began to unfold across the media. The next morning, news outlets picked up the incident, their headlines stark and accusatory. Sasha Obama targeted in airport discrimination scandal. Former president demands transparency on TSA misconduct and bias. A call for systemic change. The office of Barack Obama swiftly released a statement detailing the incident and calling for immediate reform. Carefully worded yet unmistakably pointed, the statement made it clear. This was not an isolated case, and the Obama family was committed to using their influence to confront the systemic issues that allowed such discrimination to persist. Public reaction was swift and polarized. Supporters flooded social media with messages of solidarity, while critics accused the Obamas of overreacting or leveraging their influence unfairly. Amid the clamor, however, one thing was undeniable. The incident struck a nerve. Within days, an internal investigation was launched at National Harbor Airport. Both the TSA and the airline involved faced intense scrutiny as reports surfaced detailing similar experiences from other passengers. Whistleblowers within the TSA began to come forward, painting a troubling picture of a workplace culture rife with implicit bias and unchecked authority. The employees involved in Sasha's case were suspended pending investigation, but their actions had already drawn widespread public condemnation. Among them, Sean Mitchell, identified in leaked reports, defended himself publicly, claiming that his decisions were based on protocol, not prejudice. Barack followed the media coverage with a mix of satisfaction and frustration. The attention was necessary to maintain pressure, but he understood that real change required more than public outrage. It demanded systemic reform. In Washington, Barack met with representatives from the TSA and the Department of Transportation. The meeting was tense from the outset, the room filled with officials eager to defend their policies. Yet Barack's reputation and commanding presence ensured they listened. "This isn't just about my daughter," he began, his voice steady but firm. "This is about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong because of how they look, where they come from, or the baseless assumptions of others. What happened at National Harbor Airport is a symptom of a much larger problem. And it's a problem we have both, the power and the responsibility to fix." He laid out a series of proposed reforms aimed at addressing systemic issues within the TSA. These included mandatory bias training for all employees, the establishment of an independent oversight committee to handle complaints, and the implementation of clearer protocols to prevent abuse of authority. The officials listened, some nodding in agreement, while others exchanged weary glances. By the end of the meeting, Barack secured a commitment to begin implementing reforms, though he knew the road ahead would be fraught with resistance. Meanwhile, the employees who had targeted Sasha faced mounting consequences. Public pressure intensified as more details of their behavior emerged. Mitchell, the agent who had mocked Sasha during the security screening, became a particular target of public ire. Videos surfaced online showing him engaging in similarly rude and dismissive behavior toward other passengers, revealing a pattern of misconduct. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from another TSA employee who anonymously reported that Mitchell had repeatedly made disparaging remarks about passengers of color. This accusation, coupled with a growing number of similar complaints, led to Mitchell's termination. His colleagues who were complicit in the incident faced similar consequences. The manager who ordered Sasha to leave the airport was also forced to resign after an internal review concluded that her actions were unjustified. Though her departure was officially framed as a voluntary resignation, insiders confirmed that she had been pressured to step down. For Sasha, the fallout brought a mix of bittersweet emotions. She followed the news closely, her feelings oscillating between relief and a lingering sense of anger. She was glad to see those responsible held accountable, but she knew their punishments were only a small part of the larger picture. In the weeks that followed, Sasha began to speak out about her experience. She shared her story in interviews and at events, her words candid and powerful, resonating with audiences across the country. She didn't just talk about her own pain. She addressed broader issues of injustice and inequality, using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced. Her father stood by her side, offering guidance and support while encouraging her to find her own voice. "This is your fight too," he said one evening as they prepared for a televised interview. "You have the power to make a difference, Sasha. Don't be afraid to use it." By the end of the month, the reforms Barack had fought for began to take shape. TSA employees across the country underwent mandatory bias training, and a new hotline for reporting misconduct was established. The Oversight Committee, though still in its infancy, promised greater accountability for the agency. For Sasha, these changes marked a step in the right direction, but she knew the fight was far from over. Her experience at National Harbor Airport had been a painful reminder of how much work remained. But it had also shown her the power of speaking out and the importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. Morning sunlight cast a soft golden glow over Washington, as Barack Obama sipped his coffee on the balcony of his family's home. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of media attention, high-stakes meetings, and policy proposals. Yet, as he looked out over the city, a quiet determination settled within him. This wasn't the first time he had fought for systemic change, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Inside the house, Sasha was preparing for another public appearance. She had been invited to speak at a national conference on social justice, a chance to share her story and the lessons she had learned. The thought of standing in front of such a large audience made her stomach tighten, but she knew the importance of her voice in this moment. Standing in front of the mirror, Sasha adjusted the lapel of her blazer. Her father appeared in the doorway, his expression warm and steady. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Sasha turned to face him, her eyes reflecting a mix of nerves and determination. "A little nervous," she admitted. "But I'm ready." Barack smiled, stepping into the room. "You've got this," he said. "Just speak from the heart. People need to hear your truth." His words brought her some comfort, but she couldn't shake the weight of the responsibility resting on her shoulders. The incident at National Harbor Airport had been a catalyst for change, but it also served as a painful reminder of the injustices that persisted. She was determined to use her voice to push the conversation forward, even if the path ahead seemed daunting. The conference was held in a grand hall in downtown D.C., its walls adorned with banners proclaiming messages of justice, equality, and progress. As Sasha and Barack arrived, they were met with applause and the flash of cameras. The attention was overwhelming, but she drew strength from her father's calm presence beside her. The audience was a diverse mix of activists, policymakers, students, and community leaders. As Sasha stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium to steady herself. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "My name is Sasha Obama, and I'm here today to share a story. A story that, unfortunately, is not unique to me." She paused, letting her words resonate with the audience before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I was on my way to New York City to attend a conference. What should have been a routine trip turned into an experience of humiliation, bias, and discrimination. I was singled out, scrutinized, and ultimately forced to leave the airport. Not because of anything I did, but because of how I was perceived. Her voice grew stronger as she recounted the details, describing the invasive searches, the cold indifference, and the blatant assumptions made about her. She spoke of the pain and frustration she had felt, but also the resilience and determination that carried her through. "This isn't just about me," she said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. It's about a system that allows prejudice to dictate how people are treated. And it's about the change we must demand, together." The room erupted in applause as she concluded, her words striking a chord with everyone in attendance. As Sasha stepped off the stage, her father was waiting with a proud smile. "You were incredible," he said, pulling her into a brief hug. "That's exactly what people needed to hear." Sasha felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her, but alongside it was a renewed determination. The fight for justice was far from over, but she now knew she had the strength to continue. In the following weeks, the reforms Barack had championed began to take shape. Mandatory bias training sessions for TSA employees were rolled out nationwide, focusing on challenging stereotypes and fostering empathy. An independent oversight committee was established to investigate complaints and ensure accountability. A new hotline for reporting discriminatory behavior also became operational, giving passengers a direct channel to voice their concerns. The changes were met with mixed reactions. Many praised the measures as a step toward equity, while others resisted, labeling the efforts as unnecessary or burdensome. Barack, no stranger to opposition, remained steadfast in his commitment to the cause. Sasha, too, continued to push for change. She used her platform to amplify the voices of others, sharing stories of those who had faced similar injustices. Her speeches, interviews, and social media posts sparked vital conversations, inspiring others to speak out and demand accountability. One afternoon, Sasha received an email from a young woman who had recently traveled through National Harbor Airport shortly after the incident. The woman described how she was treated with kindness and respect by TSA agents, a stark contrast to her previous experiences. "I don't know what changed," the email read, "but I wanted to thank you. Your story made a difference." Sasha read the email twice, her heart swelling with gratitude and hope. She forwarded it to her father, who replied with a simple yet powerful message: "This is why we fight." In the months that followed, the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread. Other airports began adopting similar reforms, and advocacy groups pushed for broader changes across the transportation industry. For Sasha, the experience was a profound lesson in resilience and the power of speaking out. One evening, as she and her father sat on the balcony watching the city lights twinkle, she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think things will really change?" she asked. Barack took a sip of his coffee, his gaze steady. "Change is always slow," he said, "but every step forward matters. Every voice raised, every injustice challenged, it all adds up. And the fact that you're asking that question, that you care enough to fight for a better future, is proof that we're moving in the right direction." Sasha nodded, her resolve deepening. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready to walk it. Sasha Obama's story reminds us of the strength in resilience and the importance of speaking out to fight for fairness. If you were in her position, what would you have done? Have you ever faced injustice and stood up for what's right? Share your story in the comments. Your voice could inspire others and spark meaningful change. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family to help spread the message of respect and responsibility. Thank you for watching and supporting. Together, we can create positive change, one step at a time. These stories are collected and edited to promote human values in life, with the support of AI. If there are any errors, we sincerely appreciate your understanding and feedback. Wishing you all the best in life.